Hey everyone, welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're tackling AI and big tech and all the forces shaping their future.
Yeah, sounds fun.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And we've got some really interesting sources to work with. So we've got Dan Ha. You might know him from Global Money Talk. He had this great discussion right from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. And we've also got some choice bits from Jensen Huang's NVIDIA earnings call.
Oh, wow, that's going to be a good one.
Yeah, it is. So by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a much clearer picture of just how powerful NVIDIA really is and the potential rivals they might be facing down. Plus, you know, the Justice Department is coming after Google, and that could totally shake up the entire tech landscape.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to unsack for sure.
Definitely. So let's just jump right into it. So Dan Ha pointed out something that I think is really fascinating. It's kind of head-scratching. You've got NVIDIA, the AI darling. They basically doubled their revenue and profits this year.
You'd think they'd be celebrating.
Right. But their stock price stayed pretty flat. Meanwhile, Deere, you know, the tractor folks, they reported this massive profit drop, nearly 50% gone.
Ouch.
But their stock jumps up 8%. What's the deal with that?
Well, you know, the stock market is a fickle beast.
Uh-huh.
It's not always about how a company's doing right now. It's all about expectations. What do investors think is going to happen down the road?
So those share prices are like little fortune tellers, basically.
Trying to predict the future. Yeah, exactly.
So even though NVIDIA just totally knocked it out of the park, maybe investors were expecting even more?
Could be.
So they can't do anything, right?
Right.
But let's dig into what they did accomplish. So their earnings report shows they're still at the top of their game when it comes to AI training. But for those of us who don't spend all day thinking about AI, what exactly does that mean?
It's a good question. So AI training is basically the heavy lifting. It's the process of teaching an AI model to do its thing.
Ah.
Whether that's, you know, recognizing faces, translating languages, writing code like a pro.
Wow.
It takes an insane amount of computing power.
Makes sense.
And that's where NVIDIA's chips really shine. But there's another piece to this AI puzzle: inference.
Inference.
Right. That's where the AI model that's already been trained gets put to work, making decisions and churning out results based on what it's learned.
Oh, so it's like training for a marathon versus actually running the race.
That's a great way to put it.
And this inference part is where some people think NVIDIA might stumble, right?
Yeah, that's the hot topic.
Like, aren't there other companies trying to get in on the action with their own fancy chips?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole crowd of contenders eyeing that inference prize. But Jensen Huang, NVIDIA's CEO, doesn't seem too worried. He's got this analogy that really gets to the heart of why NVIDIA might have an edge.
Okay, I'm all ears. I love a good analogy.
He compares it to training a race car driver, right? You wouldn't train someone on a Porsche and then throw them into a Ford Fiesta for the big race.
Uh-huh, no way.
Right? They'd be lost. The driver performs best in the car they're most familiar with. And it's the same with AI models. They run most efficiently on the same hardware they were trained on.
Oh, interesting. So even if someone comes up with a cheaper, maybe even faster chip for inference, those AI models are already trained on NVIDIA's stuff. Companies might not want to switch, especially if they've already spent a ton of money building their systems on NVIDIA's platform.
Exactly. And as Jensen Huang put it, nothing is cheaper than stuff that's already been paid for.
Oh, he's got a point there.
Switching costs are real. It's not just about buying new chips. It's about reconfiguring entire systems, retraining models, and risking all sorts of performance hiccups along the way.
Yikes.
Yeah, no one wants that.
Okay, so this inference advantage, that's like NVIDIA's secret weapon.
It could be.
But technology moves so fast, won't someone figure out a way to, like, crack the code and offer something cheaper and better eventually?
That's always a possibility. But there's another layer to this story that I think makes NVIDIA's position even stronger. It's like they've built a moat around their business.
A moat?
Yeah, and it just keeps getting wider and deeper.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Tell me more about this moat.
So Jensen Huang has made it clear that NVIDIA is on a mission to release a new, even more powerful chip every single year.
Wow.
They've got Blackwell coming out in 2025, and there's already buzz about what's coming in 2026.
So it's like this never-ending arms race for AI processing power.
Yeah. If companies want to stay at the cutting edge of AI training, they've got to keep upgrading to the latest NVIDIA chip.
It's like a subscription service.
Kinda. But here's the really brilliant part. Those top-of-the-line chips from last year, they don't just disappear.
What happens to them?
They become the workhorses for all those inference tasks.
I see.
So it creates this amazing cycle where demand for NVIDIA's products is constantly fueled by both the need for cutting-edge training and the growing demand for powerful inference capabilities.
So it's not just about selling one chip, it's about creating this whole ecosystem where those older chips find a new purpose.
That's exactly right.
It's pretty genius when you think about it.
Yeah, they've really thought this through.
I'm starting to understand why some investors are so bullish on NVIDIA's future, but tell me, is this purely a hardware game? What about software?
That's a really interesting question, and it gets to the heart of how NVIDIA might evolve in the coming years.
Okay.
Right now, they're definitely the hardware champions, but could we see a future where software becomes their true differentiator?
It's like the iPhone all over again, right? In the early days, it was all about the latest processor, the coolest new camera.
Yeah.
But eventually, those hardware advancements started to slow down. And it was the software, the apps, the ecosystem that really set Apple apart.
Right. It was all about that seamless user experience.
Could NVIDIA follow a similar path?
That's a really interesting parallel. We know Jensen Huang is a brilliant strategist, so I wouldn't be surprised if he's already thinking along those lines.
Imagine a world where NVIDIA's chips are not only the fastest, but also the easiest to work with, thanks to this powerful software ecosystem that just makes AI development seamless and intuitive.
That could be a real game changer for sure.
Yeah, it would be huge. Okay, so NVIDIA might be building this fortress in the AI world, but what about the other giants out there?
Right.
Let's shift gears and talk about Google. They're facing some serious heat from the Justice Department, who are recommending some pretty drastic antitrust actions,
Yeah, I heard about that.
including potentially forcing them to sell off their Chrome browser.
Wow, that's a big deal.
That's gotta hurt.
Yeah, it's definitely a blow. The markets reacted pretty quickly. Alphabet's stock took a hit after that news came out.
Makes sense.
Legal battles are tough to predict, but this is not going away anytime soon.
There's a lot of pessimism from analysts right now, with a lot of them saying that Google's best case scenario is just to hold on to what they've got.
Yeah, they're getting squeezed from both sides. Competitors like Microsoft are breathing down their necks,
Right.
and the government's turning up the pressure.
It's a tough spot to be in.
Definitely not an enviable position.
But you seem to think that there's a chance Google could come out of this stronger. What makes you think they have more fight in them than the market seems to believe?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm necessarily optimistic. It's more that I think the situation is a bit more nuanced than it appears at first glance.
Okay.
It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and think that Google is doomed.
Yeah.
But this is a company that has repeatedly defied expectations and reinvented itself over the years.
They've got a pretty impressive track record.
That's for sure. So let's look at their valuation. Google's currently trading at around 20 to 21 times their earnings,
Okay.
which is basically in line with the average for the market as a whole.
So pretty standard.
Yeah, but when you consider their dominance in search advertising and cloud computing, it seems pretty low.
Interesting. So you're saying the market might be undervaluing Google even with all this negative news swirling around.
It's possible. It's like the stock price is already baking in all the bad news, which means there's room for a potential rebound.
Aha. If they can manage to weather the storm.
Exactly. It's all about looking beyond the headlines and understanding the fundamentals.
Okay, so you're saying there's still hope for Google.
I think so. If they can successfully navigate these challenges, even partially, there's a strong case to be made that their stock could bounce back and start trading at a premium again.
It's a risky bet, for sure.
No doubt about that.
Especially with all the uncertainty around these antitrust actions.
Uh-huh.
But high risk, high reward, right?
That's the game we're in. And I think that's the key takeaway here. Google's fate isn't sealed yet.
Okay.
They have tons of resources, a proven track record of innovation, and this amazing ability to adapt to changing market dynamics.
So we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Whether they can leverage those strengths to overcome these challenges, well, that's the billion-dollar question.
You know, you said something earlier that really caught my attention. You were talking about how breaking up these big tech companies could actually backfire
Oh, yeah.
and weaken America's position in the global AI race.
It's a crucial point, and I think it often gets lost in these debates about antitrust.
Definitely.
We have to remember that AI development isn't just a domestic game. It's a global competition.
It's like the Olympics of tech.
Haha, yeah, something like that. And right now, American companies are leading the charge.
We are.
Yeah, they've got the resources, the talent, the infrastructure to drive innovation at scale,
Okay.
but breaking them up could change all that.
So you're saying that creating a bunch of smaller companies, while good for competition here in the U.S., could actually make them weaker against bigger, more unified players in other countries.
It's a real possibility.
Like China, for example.
Exactly. We talked about how scale is so important in AI.
Yeah.
Having vast amounts of data computing power and financial resources is critical. If we start chopping up these super heavyweights, as Dan Ha called them,
Right.
we risk turning them into featherweights who will struggle to compete on the global stage.
It's like we'd be handing a strategic advantage to our rivals.
It's a real concern. And it could have major consequences because AI isn't just some abstract technology. It's going to reshape the global economic and political landscape. It's going to impact everything from healthcare and education to national security and defense.
Wow, that's a pretty sobering thought.
It is.
So to recap, we've got NVIDIA potentially becoming this unstoppable force in AI. Google's battling to stay on top while fighting off rivals and regulators. And then there's this whole other layer of a global AI race where America's leadership is potentially on the line.
You got it. It's a lot to process.
It really is.
It is. But the key takeaway is that we're living through a pivotal moment in tech history. The decisions made in the next few years will have a huge impact on the future of AI, not just for companies, but for all of us.
So where do we go from here?
That's the billion-dollar question, and I think it leads us to some fascinating possibilities and scenarios.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
But before we dive into those, why don't we take a moment to just reflect on what really stood out to you about all of this? What really piqued your curiosity?
That's a fantastic idea. It's important to pause and digest all this information before we move on. So tell me, what are your thoughts? What resonated with you the most? We want to hear from you before we continue our deep dive in the next segment. It's pretty amazing to think about where all this could go. You know, on one hand, you have NVIDIA building what feels like an unbreakable fortress around AI hardware.
Like that moat we were talking about. It just keeps getting wider and deeper with every new chip they release.
Right, and they've got that incredible cycle going where demand for training feeds the demand for inference, and those older chips just become more valuable over time. It's brilliant.
It is. But, can any company, even one as dominant as NVIDIA, really stay ahead of the curve forever? I mean, tech moves so fast.
Yeah, it's like the blink of an eye and everything changes.
Right. Isn't there always that risk that something completely unexpected comes along and disrupts everything?
Like a total game changer.
Exactly. We've seen this story play out before. A company dominates for a while, and then bam, something new pops up and shakes everything up.
And suddenly they're yesterday's news.
Exactly.
Like, remember Nokia?
Oh, yeah.
They were the kings of the mobile phone world.
Totally.
And then the iPhone came along and boom, everything changed.
It's a whole new era.
So what could a so-called NVIDIA killer even look like?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, is there something out there right now that could actually threaten their dominance?
It's hard to say for sure, but there are a few possibilities. One scenario is that a totally new type of chip emerges.
Okay.
Something that just blows NVIDIA's chips out of the water in terms of performance and efficiency.
Like what?
Well, maybe it's based on quantum computing or some other technology that we haven't even thought of yet.
Quantum computing. Now that's a whole other conversation.
Haha, yeah, we could do a whole deep dive just on that.
Let's stay focused on NVIDIA for now. So besides this hypothetical supership, are there any other threats on the horizon?
Another possibility is that the way we approach AI training changes completely. Right now, it's all about these huge data centers packed with powerful chips.
Yeah.
But what if someone figures out how to train AI models in a distributed way, using the combined power of millions of smaller devices?
So like a hive mind kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like harnessing the collective intelligence of the internet to train AI.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It almost sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right.
But, stranger things have happened. And then there's another scenario that's worth considering: open source disruption.
Open source. How could that threaten a company like NVIDIA? I mean, they're all about proprietary hardware.
Well, right now, NVIDIA controls both the hardware and the software ecosystem around AI training.
Yeah.
But what if a really powerful open source platform emerges that offers a real alternative to NVIDIA's tools?
Interesting.
If developers and researchers start using this open source platform, it could really shake things up.
Okay, so it's not just about the chips themselves. It's about the whole ecosystem that surrounds them.
Exactly. If NVIDIA loses control of that ecosystem, their hardware might not be enough to maintain their dominance.
That's a good point. So even the king can be dethroned.
That's the nature of the tech world. Things change so fast.
It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to Google. They're definitely facing some major challenges to their own dominance.
Yeah, we were talking about those Justice Department antitrust actions and how some analysts are basically writing them off, saying their best case scenario is just to hold on to what they've got.
I know it's easy to get caught up in that narrative, but I think Google might have more fight in them than people realize.
Okay. Why do you think that?
Well, for one thing, they've got this massive user base and a ton of data.
Yeah.
More data than almost any other company in the world.
That's true. Data is like gold in the AI world.
It is, but it's also a double-edged sword.
How so?
Well, that's what regulators are worried about, that Google is using all that data to stifle competition and maintain its monopoly.
Right.
It's a legitimate concern, but Google has shown that they can adapt and evolve. Remember, they weren't always the leader in cloud computing.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
They had to fight their way to the top. They offer a better product to undercut the competition. They're not afraid to get their hands dirty.
So they still have that hunger, that drive to win.
I think so. And they also have very deep pockets.
Meaning?
They have the financial resources to invest in research and development, acquire promising startups, and just weather any short-term setbacks.
Like they have this war chest to fight for AI supremacy.
Exactly. And they're not just sitting around. They're investing heavily in areas like quantum computing and generative AI.
So they're playing the long game.
They are. But even with all of that, they still have to figure out how to navigate these antitrust challenges.
Yeah. What do you think's going to happen with all of that?
It's tough to predict. Legal battles are always a bit of a wild card, but I think there are a few possibilities. One is that Google manages to work out a settlement with the Justice Department.
So like a slap on the wrist.
Basically, you might have to make some concessions, divest some smaller businesses, or change some of their practices.
But they'd survive, essentially.
Yeah, they'd come out relatively unscathed. Another scenario is that the courts rule against them and force them to make some big changes. They might have to break up the company or spin off some key businesses.
Wow.
Or face stricter regulations on how they use data.
That would be huge.
It would. It would shake up the entire tech landscape. But there's also a third possibility, one that I think is really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
What if Google decides to go on the offensive?
What do you mean?
Instead of just defending themselves against these antitrust accusations, they could use this as an opportunity to completely reshape the conversation about AI regulation.
Oh, that's interesting. So they could become like the champions of responsible AI.
Exactly. They could use their expertise and resources to develop ethical guidelines for AI, work with governments to create clear regulations, and really position themselves as leaders in the responsible use of AI.
That's a bold move. It's like turning a weakness into a strength.
Right. Instead of being seen as the problem, they become part of the solution.
That's a really interesting strategy.
It's risky, but it could pay off big time. It could earn them some goodwill with regulators, set them apart from their competitors.
And really solidify their position as a leader in the AI space.
That's the idea.
So we've got three potential paths for Google: a negotiated settlement, a forced breakup, or this proactive push for responsible AI leadership.
It's going to be fascinating to see which path they choose.
It is, but there's another layer to all of this that we haven't really talked about yet: the global implications of AI dominance.
You're right. This isn't just about which companies win in the U.S. It's about which countries control this technology and shape how it's developed.
Exactly. We touched on how breaking up American tech giants could actually weaken them against rivals like China.
Right.
But let's dig into that a little deeper.
Yeah, let's talk about this global AI race. So China has made it very clear that they want to be the world leader in AI by 2030.
They've been pretty vocal about that.
Yeah, they're investing a ton of money in research development talent. They're building up their own AI champions.
Like who?
Companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. They're becoming more and more competitive on the global stage.
So it's a real race.
It is. And China has some big advantages. They've got access to tons of data thanks to their huge population and their embrace of digital technology.
Makes sense.
Plus, they have a government that's willing to put a lot of money behind strategic industries like AI.
So they're really going all in on this.
They are. So it's not just about the technology itself. It's about the whole ecosystem. The governments support the access to talent and resources.
It's like a national effort.
Exactly. It's about national will.
Is the U.S. falling behind in this race?
I wouldn't say we're falling behind yet, but the competition is definitely heating up.
Okay.
The U.S. still has some key advantages. We've got a strong research base, a culture of innovation, a vibrant private sector.
So we're still in the game.
We are, but we need to be smart and proactive if we want to stay ahead in the long run.
So it's not time to panic, but we need to be paying attention.
Exactly. We need to be strategic about this.
And we need to be thinking about this not just in terms of profits for companies, but in terms of national security and global influence.
Right. It's much bigger than just the bottom line.
If another country controls the future of AI, what does that mean for the U.S.? What does that mean for the world?
Those are the questions we need to be asking.
They're not easy questions to answer.
They're not, but they're important ones. We need to have a serious national conversation about how to make sure that the U.S. remains a leader in AI.
So many things to consider. Do we need to rethink antitrust? Should we be investing more in AI research?
Right. How do we balance the need for innovation with the need to protect our values and interests?
Those are some tough questions.
They are. And there are no easy answers, but they're questions that we need to be grappling with as a society.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But the key takeaway is that we're at this incredible turning point. The decisions we make today will have a huge impact on the future of AI, not just in the U.S., but globally.
You've given our listener a lot to think about. We've covered NVIDIA's rise, Google's challenges this global AI race, and the possibility that some totally unexpected disruption could change everything.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around.
It really is. But before we move on to our final segment, I want to ask you, what do you think is the most important takeaway from all of this?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing to remember is that the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make both individually and collectively.
So we have a role to play.
We do. We have a responsibility to engage in these conversations, to ask tough questions, and to demand that this technology is developed and used in a way that benefits everyone.
That's a powerful message, and I think it's a perfect lead-in to our final segment where we'll explore some potential scenarios for the future of AI and what it all means for us as individuals and as a society. But before we do that, let's take a moment to just reflect on what we've learned so far. What really stood out to you about all of this? Are we headed toward a world where a few powerful AI companies control everything, or will new players emerge and challenge the status quo? What are your hopes and fears about the future of AI?
It's a lot to consider, isn't it? So many possibilities, so many different paths we could go down.
Yeah, and that's what makes this moment in AI so exciting. I mean, anything feels possible at this point.
Okay, so lay it on me. What are some of these paths? Where could all of this lead?
Well, one path you could see is that the current giants like NVIDIA and Google, even with all the antitrust stuff they're dealing with, they leverage their advantages and they become even more powerful.
So it's like that winner-takes-all scenario that we've seen play out in tech before, where the big companies just keep getting bigger. Yeah, it's a familiar pattern, and AI could really accelerate that. But then on the other hand, there's this other path, a more disruptive one.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Imagine this wave of startups maybe focused on very specific areas within AI. They find ways to outmaneuver the giants. They come up with these innovative solutions that the big companies just haven't thought of.
Now, that's a story I'd love to see unfold, the underdog innovators shaking things up. Is that really a possibility, though?
I think it's more possible now than ever before. The barriers to entry in AI are lower than they've ever been.
How so?
Well, you've got open source tools, you've got powerful cloud computing that makes resources available to pretty much anyone, and there's this incredible global community of researchers and developers who are sharing knowledge and collaborating like crazy.
So you're saying the game's not over yet. There's still a chance for smaller players to make a real impact.
Absolutely, and I think that's what makes this whole thing so fascinating. We're not just talking about companies battling for market share here. We're talking about the future of intelligence itself. Who controls it? How will it be used? These are questions that affect all of us.
Yeah, those are the questions that really keep me up at night. And it brings us back to something you said earlier about this global AI race. If AI development is this super heavyweight match, how does America stay in the lead?
It's a tough question. It forces us to think about the role of government and regulation in all of this.
Okay.
Should we be focused on breaking up big companies to create more competition here at home, even if it means they might have a harder time competing against companies in other countries?
Or should we be looking for ways to support American AI companies, even if it means accepting that some consolidation is inevitable?
It's a tough call. There are good arguments on both sides. I think we need to get past this idea that big is always bad or that competition is the only thing that matters.
Yeah, it's not that simple.
It's not. This is a complex issue with incredibly high stakes.
So it's not about just picking a side. It's about finding that balance where we encourage innovation, we protect consumers, and we make sure that American companies can compete on a global level.
Exactly. We need to have these conversations, we need to weigh the trade-offs, and we need to be flexible and adapt our strategies as things change. This isn't a sprint, it's a marathon.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about NVIDIA's rise, Google's challenges, this global AI race, and the possibility that some completely unexpected event could change everything.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
It has. Any final thoughts before I wrap things up?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the future of AI is not predetermined. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make,
Yeah.
by the decisions that governments make, by the investments that companies make, by the conversations we're having right now.
We all have a role to play.
We do. We have a responsibility to stay informed, to ask tough questions, and to demand that this technology is used for good.
That's a powerful message. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We hope you learned something new today. And as always, we encourage you to keep diving deep, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep those conversations going because the future of AI is up to all of us. Until next time, Sarah A.